Last week, we finally got to the bottom of MST3K's amazing third season, but before we talk about Season 4, I couldn't think of a better time to hit the brakes a bit and celebrate an MST3K legend who made her basic cable debut on that very season, Mary Jo Pehl. Mary Jo spent 8 years writing MST3K, starting with the Season 4 episode Teenagers from Outer Space. She also co-wrote the amazing Colossal Episode Guide and Mystery Science Theater 3000 the movie, and was a co-star of the show for its last 4 seasons, including its entire run on the Sci-Fi Channel. She's also a cinematic Titanic veteran, and is currently riffing with fellow MST3K legend Bridget Nelson for riff tracks, as well as starring in her own web series, Ruth Larson Lives. Believe it or not, as the description of this episode indicates, I actually interviewed Mary Jo just a few months ago. I am your host, Ryan Rodriguez, and this is a very special episode of the Coolness Chronicles Season 1, The History and Legacy of Mystery Science Theater 3000. Special guest star, Mary Jo Pehl. Just a preface before we begin, this interview was a little wonky sound-wise, but it was conducted during the embryonic stage of the podcast when I was working from a $25 mic and recording off of Google Hangouts. But hey, it's free, so what do you have to complain about? Without further ado, I give you a momentous, for me anyway, interview with one of my heroes. So I just wanted to thank you again for doing this. It really means a lot. This is...
sure, Ryan.
This podcast is very much a labor of love for me. So to have you as our first guest is just the greatest thing I could have possibly wished for.
Pleasure.
So I guess let's get started. Before getting the job at MST3K, did you have a history with any of your future coworkers?
Oh, yeah, we all did stand-up comedy together, so I had known them in the stand-up comedy circles in the Twin Cities.
How did you get the job? Were they seeking new writers, or did someone recommend you, or was it a combination of the two?
Well, they got picked up, Mystery Science Theater got picked up by the Comedy Channel, I think, and so they were looking to staff up a little bit more. And so Bridget called me. Bridget and I were friends. I was friends with Mike and Frank at that time, and Trace. We had all gone way back, doing a lot of shows and comedy together. And Bridget called me and she said, "You didn't hear it from me, but they're looking for another writer, so contact Mike." So I kept the secret for a really long time. And then I called her, she was the head writer, and I called Mike and I said, I would like to apply if you're looking for writers. And he said, "Oh, as a matter of fact, we are." And so I submitted an audition package, and then I went up in for a couple of movies to write a couple of movies for an audition.
Your first episode that you're credited with was Teenagers from Outer Space, which was the 4th episode of the 4th season. So were they already in production when you started joining in the writer's room?
Correct, for the 4th season, yes.
So for the writing process, were there any movies that were easier to write host segments for than riffs, or vice versa?
Wow, I'm sure there were, although I would be hard-pressed to identify specific ones. My sense is that if it was an easy movie to write, if the movie had a lot of things to hang on to, like bad production values, bad dialogue, enough space to write jokes for, we had more material to write host segments from. The launching pad was bigger for us to brainstorm off of. Although, like I say, I couldn't recall specifics. I do know that there were movies where, when it came to writing the host segments, we were absolutely stumped. We had nowhere to go with anything. So I remember those days in the writing room for sure.
And were there any movies that were particularly more enjoyable experiences, or some that were much more difficult aside from Manos?
I'm sorry, Manos was going to be my first answer. The Coleman Francis movies were hard because they were so off the wall. They were not cohesive. At least with Manos, there's some thread going there, but the Coleman Francis ones like Red Zone Cuba are so random and difficult to watch. The film quality is bad. The production values are bad. It's hard to make heads or tails of them. But some were really fun, and one of the first ones that comes to mind is Space Mutiny. There's a lot of visuals to sink your teeth into. There's so much going on visually. The dialogue is silly. The premise is silly. So those were always much easier. That Parts the Colonus Horror, or Colonus the Parts Horror, whatever it's called. Movies like that always had a lot more to like sink your teeth into.
I'm glad you actually mentioned Coleman Francis, because I have a really soft spot for the Beast of Yucca Flats. And it's one of the most painful things I think I've ever watched, but it's something about the riffs is that you could feel like the tension in the writer's room as you're watching it. Just like, what do we say about this? Like, what is there to possibly say about this? But it also has probably my favorite riff of that entire season, when they show I think it's the girl towards the end of the movie, and Crow says she was in a Bergman film, she played low self-esteem. That's possibly my favorite riff of that entire season. It's just one of those things that it pops up in my head at random times, and I can't get it out of my brain. And I love it so
great,
much.
yeah.
And are there any movies that you regret doing? Like, I remember seeing an intro for The Brute Man on one of the DVD sets, and you said that you probably wouldn't do it again today, given the chance. Were there any others like that?
Not that I recall offhand. I think The Brute Man is a good example of one that I would revisit the idea of doing. Like I've said, I think there are more particular lines or jokes that I would want to revisit, being this at this point in my life, and some things we just said unnecessarily. We were writing 800 riffs, jokes, a movie, and it's always kind of by the skin of your teeth because we were on a tight production schedule, and I more blanch at jokes when I watch them. I more blanch at specific jokes, like, oh, we didn't need to call that out, or that was unnecessarily mean spirited. So,
transitioning from the writing to the performing side, when was the decision made that you would become the new Magic Voice?
I don't know if it was a terribly active decision. When we were doing this show, it was very garage band, in that whoever was available to do a part got the part.
Mm-hmm.
And it was mostly the people in the office at the time, or the writers, taking a part. I think I can't remember what the circumstances were, but maybe the production assistant, Alex, who had, or production manager, couldn't do it that day. So somebody said, oh, Mary Jo can do it. And so I just did it. I don't think it was a big conversation.
So did you do the part when they were filming the host segments, or did you record it when they were in post?
In post.
Okay. And then, so shortly after that, in season 5, you do your first on-camera appearance in Hercules as one of the Amazon women with Bridget. And did you have any acting ambitions prior to the show, or was this
not a whit? I was perfectly content to be a writer, and there's something about the host segments that we would write that you just went along with the fun and the silliness of it. So when Bridget and I were drafted to play the Amazon moms, you just I saw it more as, oh, I get to play with my colleague and friend on screen. So absolutely, I'll jump in and do it.
You joined the show towards the end of the Joel era, kind of when he and Jim were not really getting along the greatest. After he left, what were the most notable differences to the show when the Mike era started?
I'm not sure I can answer that, but I'll try to, because when I came on board, I think I came on board and Joel ended up being there only one more year. I was pretty self-absorbed because I loved the job so much and I wanted to really hunker down and focus. So I'm not sure that I was alert or aware of anything going on beyond me showing up and writing good jokes. I was not sensitive to whatever else was going on. I had no familiarity with the interactions beyond that. I don't think any notable differences, I don't think are because things changed in the office or the writing room so much as I became more confident in my writing. I think I got to a point where I was learning so much from Mike Nelson as head writer and learning so much from my fellow writers as fellow writers. So, and that didn't really have a lot to do with Joel being there or not being there, if that answers the question.
And so, since with Mike, you had to kind of adapt the show to his strengths and abandon some of the structures and the hallmarks that were present in the Joel era, like the invention exchange, and and kind of adapting to a different relationship with the bots, whereas Joel would be kind of paternal, and Mike was more their buddy. What was it like, kind of forming this new identity that had to be similar enough to the past, but also new enough to keep being fresh and interesting to keep going?
I'm not sure that it was an overarching or 30,000, mile, whatever the term is, the big picture. I think it was incremental. I don't think that we were necessarily writing to anyone's strengths or weaknesses. We were just writing to their personalities, and no matter what it was, their different acting styles and personality styles would deliver something differently. So yeah, I think in the writing, probably mindful of the idea that this seems more organic to Mike's temperament or voice or his relationship to the bots, but I don't think there just was never much of a long game with how we wrote episodes until we got picked up by the Sci-Fi Channel, and then they specifically wanted us to do story arcs. So there's some overlap there, and I can't remember how that overlapped, but a lot of it was directed by which is the Sci-Fi Channel, how we wrote the overarching storylines. So it all kind of segued, evolved.
When you first appeared as Pearl Forrester in season 6, were there any notions that she would return, or that role would expand at all, or was it just kind of a throwaway appearance?
Yeah, I think everything. My whole life, I've always thought that everything was a one shot. So I don't know that I thought she would be back. I think Frank maybe came up with the idea that Forrester's mother visits, or somehow that idea came up. I I got the part, it was just assigned the part. And then I don't know that there was the idea that she would return and step into playing the arch nemesis once Trace left. Did I answer your question? Does that answer the question?
Yes.
Did I head in the right direction? Okay, good. Thanks, Ryan.
Now, the Dark Times, the movie. The only recollections that I can find from everybody seem to be solely from Jim, Trace, Mike, and Kevin, and all the reactions seem to be that it was generally miserable for everybody to be doing. And were there any particularly notable moments, or what was it like from your perspective for making that movie?
Well, once the movie was written, Paul and Bridget and I were not at the studio shooting the movie, so we weren't boots on the ground at that point. We had all written the movie in the usual writing room, but then everyone else went to the set to shoot the movie. And so I didn't really have a sense of that. I did have this sense that we were all really, really frustrated and discouraged with the whole studio process and how they didn't really get the show. There were lines that were shot down that were so funny because they didn't get them, or they didn't like them, or they had this studio attitude about it, trying to make it feels like, they were trying to make it more of a mass appeal, and that was never the appeal of Mystery Science Theater. It was never going to be the summer blockbuster. So that was really frustrating. But like I said, I wasn't on the set, so I don't know. I'm sure that frustration was palpable, and this was very much a Jim project. Jim wanted to make this movie, and I don't think I'm saying anything that hasn't been said before. And I think the rest of us felt like our ownership, or our place in writing Mystery Science Theater was sort of put by the wayside. We were doing the work, but we didn't. It was at somebody else's behest who wanted to have a movie.
When the movie's over and you come back for season 7 with only 6 episodes to kind of say goodbye to everything, and it looked kind of like the end was near. And I mean, reading the episode guide, the part that you wrote particularly about just the 6 episodes that would eventually air didn't even have air dates assigned to them. They were kind of like, I guess these are going to come out, so this is what we're doing.
Fingers crossed.
So in that period, so Frank leaves before that, and then Pearl gets bumped up to basically series regular. And so now you're an official co-star. Was there kind of like a learning curve to that? Since you're getting way more screen time, you're getting a lot more opportunities to kind of flex your acting muscles, so to speak. And your chemistry with Trace is just absolutely tremendous. And I just wonder if that was something that was developing through performing, or is that something that you kind of had in the room, or just had in your general friendship that kind of contributed to that?
I think we had it in our general friendship. I mean, like I said, we went way back. We did so many goofball shows way back in the day in the Minneapolis comedy scene. The learning curve was that I had so many more lines to memorize, and you were very kind when you implied that I had an opportunity to exercise my acting muscles, because I don't consider myself much of an actor. I just remember how hard it was for me to learn how to say my lines and move at the same time. It was like walking. I couldn't walk and chew gum. So I just remember spending a lot of time memorizing, because I wanted to get on the set and be professional about it and not screw up the whole shoot day, because I couldn't remember a line, or I couldn't say the line and do the motion at the same time, or whatever the acting thing was at the same time. So I worked really hard on that, and I think I think it was 20 years before I went back and looked at any episodes, and I can roughly see how much more comfortable I am in front of the camera. And then once the fiction was created with Bobo and Brain Guy, it was just as challenging, but I felt more comfortable because we got to play off each other, and I think we really established a rhythm and a playfulness with each other. Mm-hmm. You're working with colleagues who you trust, so I think that starts to build. So
after Frank left, you became the film screener. And yes. What was the how was that decision made exactly? Was it kind of like Frank kind of implied that when he became the film screener, when he came in, it was because he was the first new guy in, Josh was out. So first guy in gets the bigger job because everybody else was off building sets and stuff. That was basically what he implied. But was it a similar situation?
I think that was Frank's experience. I just realized that that with him leaving, there was going to be a gap there. So I just went to Trace and identified the gap and said, I'd be happy to take this on. I just knew it would have to be done for the production to continue. So,
how many submissions did you get? Like per however many you actually selected. So
wow, let's say that's a really good question, and I don't recall. I could probably give you a general ratio just to illustrate the point that we probably picked one movie for every 200 or 300. I mean, it's a really slim ratio because so many of the movies, this was all still VHS, so many of them were they're very dark, filmed very darkly. Some of them had content that we couldn't work around. I took my cue from Frank. Frank could tell, or he learned to identify sooner in the process whether or not a movie would work. And we ended up having to watch them all the way through because there were a couple of times where the writers group, before I got on board, the whole writers group would start watching the movie and the general idea, and if it was, you could see it properly, but then as the movie played on, there was content that was really difficult to work around. I think Side Hackers is one, for an example. But there you were stuck with the movie. You had to write the movie. So I learned a bit about streamlining the process, but I would do it in my breaks from writing or line assigning. That's how I did it. And then, you winnow is my point. That's the point, Ryan. You winnow. You can figure out in the beginning if you should keep with it to see if it's worth pursuing.
And so were there any movies that you actually saw that you thought, well, this is actually good? Like, I don't want to riff this one. Like, maybe there's something of quality to this.
Oh, I don't know. I think that's a really good question. I think in my simplistic mindset, I'm sure that I thought because we got the movie, they were viable. I didn't have that discerning eye. I know Frank would have had that discerning eye. I can't say that I was as thoughtful about it.
Were there any movies that you wanted to choose but you couldn't get? I know that in your book you discussed From Hell It Came, which I actually watched, I think maybe 2 weeks ago, and was just absolutely astounded. Like, this would have made a great sci-fi era episode. It just had that perfect quality to it. Like, it was kind of like, it would have been perfect in between, like, Revenge of the Creature and The Deadly Mantis. It would have fit in absolutely perfectly, especially since the tree basically looks like like the father of Groot if he had a Fu Manchu mustache.
Right.
There's so much you could do with that, and it was just
Yes.
watching
Yeah.
watching that movie. I was just like, oh man, this would have made such a good episode. It was just such a sad thing that couldn't get
I
license
know.
for it.
I know. Um, there was one that I know. I can't remember if Frank found it, or I think Frank found it, that I was just sick we couldn't get, and it was Moment by Moment with John Travolta and Lily Tomlin. And pardon me. So it would have been this would have been the mid '90s, and I think the movie came out in late '78 or early '80s. But terrible movie. We could not get the rights for it.
Were there any that you selected or that were selected when Frank was doing it that you were there that the network said no to? Or were they all submissions basically that were approved by the network ahead of time?
I think before we went to sci-fi, I think the sci-fi channel, we started getting movies from the sci-fi channel, whatever was in their library. I think we might have had some odds and ends that we were able to get approved by them that were not filtered through them. But before that, we were getting a lot of movies from the Pralinger archives, random buyers uppers of such movies or public domain. So that's where our cash came from. Our movie cachet came from. Movie cash.
Speaking of the sci-fi years, how did it feel to become the new main Mad? I mean, it's kind of a much increased workload since you're for the first few episodes until Bobo kind of develops into more of a side character, and Brain Guy takes a few episodes to even kind of get his personality. Yeah. And it's a few episodes before you're all in the Volkswagen flying through space. What was it like, kind of like carrying that part of the show for the beginning of that season?
Well, it was pretty scary. There was some backlash about Trace leaving the show, and I expect whoever would have filled in for Trace would have experienced some backlash because he was beloved and he's hilarious. And that was kind of difficult for me to navigate, especially this was kind of the ascendancy of the internet. And so people were going crazy on chat rooms, and there were a lot of insults about my personal appearance, and that was hard to take. I was not prepared for any of that. I just thought I was doing a job that I really enjoyed. I just wanted to do right by the show. I didn't know that people would take it so personally and make it personal about me. But then I just decided to focus on the work and just do the work. I mean, I had this great job. I just wanted to do my great job. So, I mean, the job was great. I just loved my job. So I just wanted to do it.
Mm-hmm. And you're the first person to at least partially sing the theme song that didn't host the show. What led to that, basically, since it was Mike doing the composing, I assume, or everybody pitching in on the lyrics. But so how did it land on, instead of him singing the part that you end up singing, how did that end up happening?
I'm sure it came up briefly in the writing room. My recollection is that Mike came and grabbed me and said, "Let's have you do this part." And I just walked into his office and did it. You know, I don't think there was a lot of planning or thought. I think it was pretty much, well, let's have it this way. Okay.
And how was it shooting the title sequence to go along with that? It had to be surreal to just kind of be part of the main title sequence of this show that you kind of just started as.
Yeah, well, Ryan, it was all surreal. So when you're just looking in this surreal planet where you get to go to your job and write jokes on big, comfortable couches watching old movies with really funny people, your idea of what surreal kind of changes. Um, but yeah, and I just remember that day. Every time I think we had to reshoot the title sequence 2 or 3 times. Um, they're fairly tedious. It's very sequential, and as you can see, it's pretty detailed getting the timing right. So I just remember those being probably longer days than usual, and just everyone having to be on point with everything because it was a house of cards.
And so going back to a little thread from earlier, you mentioned about how the sci-fi mandate kind of affected the writing of season 8, and kind of going forward, it seemed like in season 9 and 10 there was kind of a through line that was kind of through the narrative, but it was more restrained. It was a lot less like, tune in next week when you find out what else happens with this. But
Yeah.
season 8 was very much like there were legitimate cliffhangers. And
Oh, yeah.
I can't
Yes,
imagine
right.
that was it clearly wasn't an organic transition to go into. But like, what was it like in the writers' room, just knowing like, well, we were doing basically the same show, but now we have to add this whole other element to it that we're really not used to, because you've had themed episodes before, like
Yeah,
the
yeah. I
alternate
think it
universe.
was. I think if I recall, there was some frustration about having to make this umbrella story, this overriding arch. Um, so you couldn't be as far out and random as we had been before. It all had to connect. So I know the writing process was a little more frustrating. Maybe it pushed us to be more creative to make things connect or have that through line. Yeah, it definitely got us out of our comfort zone for sure.
I like to think that when Trace and Frank are together, it's kind of like Abbott and Costello. So when it's you and Bill and Kevin, it's more like the Three Stooges. It's not a direct correlation. Like, it's not like I could say like, okay, this one's Larry, this one's Moe, this one's Curly. But there's definitely that kind of, there's a trio atmosphere to the whole thing, and it's kind of like,
Hello?
when one's gone, the two are still great, but it's when the three are together that everything is really clicking. And so like, how long do you feel that it took to kind of like get into that groove, or it was kind of like, this is going to be kind of the baseline for what's going to continue?
Oh, I don't think I could define that by the number of shows or even have a sense of that. I just know that it evolved. Well, just speaking for myself, it just kind of evolved, getting my own comfort level, being on screen, and then working with yeah, just trusting myself more and getting the rhythm, all side by side with trying to hammer out storylines that made sense. I mean, basically kind of made sense.
Were there any storylines that you guys wanted to do that Sci-Fi was apprehensive about, or was it kind of like you got the mandate to be serialized, so you did what you did, and that was what was produced, and then that was what was aired? Or was there anything that was pushed back?
I think what was new with the Sci-Fi Channel is that we had to run the scripts by them for standards and practices. We may have had to do that for Comedy Central. I just don't recall that. We never got any pushback. But Sci-Fi Channel had a different criteria, and I think there was twice that we didn't have to change lines or stories, but we had to change words. Which I can't remember what they were, but that was another element that was introduced that was kind of frustrating.
In season 9, you finally got to be in the theater for a segment.
Mm-hmm.
For I think it's Quest of the Delta Knights.
Right.
And that's probably one of my favorite theater segments, simply because Crow and Servo are just absolutely fawning over you for the entire segment.
Yeah, right.
So, what was that like to be in the theater? Because everybody, it seems, had gotten to do. I think Bridget and Paul are the only ones of the main writing crew that didn't get to do the theater segment at least once.
Yeah, likely. I think it was more nerve-wracking than a normal shoot day, and for me, a normal shoot day for the Pearl Forrester character was pretty nerve-wracking, but this was really nerve-wracking because, I've got puppets on either side of me. I'm interacting in a different way. So I do remember being very, very tense. And I've never watched that segment. And I think now that I've done riff tracks enough and I did Cinematic Titanic, I wonder if it wouldn't be different because I'm more comfortable with the format. I had never done that before, obviously, which is what you're saying. But yeah, it was pretty nerve-wracking.
I like to think that it's basically the prequel to Cinematic Titanic.
Yes!
Because you could tell in that segment, right, in that, and then also I think during the summer spectacular little special that you guys did when you did the Batman and Robin segment, and you popped in just to make comments about George Clooney. I always think that those are kind of like...
That's right.
These are the stepping stones that led to the future.
Yes.
And so going further into season 10, it seems that that's around that time Sci-Fi was getting a little more lax with the mandate of this has to be a sci-fi movie. And you were getting to do more and more kind of different things. Like, I mean, the series finale, Diabolic, is not even close to sci-fi. And then there's Hamlet, which is, I still to this day, I don't know. I'd really like to know if there is a story behind how you guys got to Hamlet, especially a German production of Hamlet.
Yeah, was Hamlet during the sci-fi era? Because
yeah, it was about 4 episodes before the series finale.
Okay. Oh, wow, yeah, I'm not sure. I think a lot of it, although that was their edict, I'm sure that a lot of it was what was available on the budget and that we could get within a reasonable amount of time. So I think that played a part in it, too, what was realistic about that.
And was there any particular challenges riffing Shakespeare?
I'm sure there were. I don't really recall specifics, but the elements were the base elements for us were still there. The overacting or underacting. Mike was the Shakespeare expert, so we had a great guy in the trenches who was very familiar with Shakespeare. So. I can't recall offhand, but I have no doubt there were.
Because that one also has one of my favorite riffs, and it's the very, very end. As they're leaving the theater, I think it's Mike that says, Hamlet will return in Thunderball. How did you take the cancellation, personally?
I think there was a part of me that was really realistic in that for a TV show to have gone on for 10 years was pretty damn great, but you never counted on the next season. So I was disappointed, but I'm pretty practical in that, there's nothing I could do about it, and we had a great run, so I felt like it was nature's way of telling me the next life adventure.
And then about 6 or 7 years later, Mike has started up Riff Tracks, and you did Glitter with him, and then I think that the next year you did the X-Files movie with Bill.
Yes.
And were there any plans to continue doing riffs for Riff Tracks, or were these kind of one-offs? Because Cinematic Titanic started the next year.
Yeah, no, I think there were one-offs. I wouldn't have been surprised either way if they had asked me to do something else down the line, but that was not. I wasn't expecting that. They were one-offs.
And for those choices of movies, was it like Mike said, basically, well, we're going to do Glitter. Do you want to do it?
Yes.
And then for X-Files, the same thing.
Correct.
And so shortly after that, Joel and I believe Frank took you out to lunch to talk about Cinematic Titanic.
Yes.
And so there was a unique mixture to that group because you'd riffed with Trace and Frank for a long time. You'd riffed with Joel for about a year, but never Josh. And so it was kind of a weird alchemy of all these different eras of the show kind of coming together to do something completely different. And how soon do you think you found the proper balance? And
I'm going to say, speaking, knowing myself as I do, I'm going to say it was at least a year, because I have really bad imposter syndrome. So I'm sure that that first year where we were figuring out the thing itself, I was trying to figure out my role, my place in it. And with imposter syndrome, you overcompensate and you overwork it. I mean, speaking for myself, so I'm sure it took me at least a year to find my legs and how to best participate in what I was bringing to the table. I think what really drove it home for me was when we finally started doing live shows. I think all of us felt really at home on stage. I think we shut the DVDs, we just did it live, and that freed us up to interact with each other and goof off with each other a little bit more, and we're all just very at home in that stage dynamic. So I think once that happened, it really gelled.
It's incredibly evident, especially in the live shows, like East Meets Watts, the collective spit take that you all do when one of the characters says the N-word is probably my favorite piece of the entire run. And it was just kind of like a perfect example of a well-oiled machine that was going full speed ahead and was just working on all cylinders.
Yeah, we really struggled with that in the movie. We didn't know what to do with it, and Josh came up with that idea, and I feel like it deals with it perfectly. You don't want to draw. I think you're just walking a really fine line with it, obviously, because the word is being said in the first place. I think Josh just made a brilliant call with that.
In what ways were the writing structure of Cinematic Titanic different or similar to MST3K?
Well, we all wrote individually. There was no writing room. So we would write a script, and then we had somebody, the time codes, we all had time codes. We would write a script, and then somebody would combine all the scripts. So you'd have a bunch of jokes, for one place, and then whereas in the writing room, we were all saying the jokes at the same time that might end up in the same place. And then I think after that, then we do the line assign. Each of us would take a section to line assign it, like we did in the MST version.
Could you walk me through your experience on the Jailbait comic?
Yeah, I got approached to write a comic book by Darren Davis of Blue Water Comics. I think it's changed its name now. And to be honest, Ryan, the only comic book I ever read was Mad Magazine. I was not very steeped in graphic novels or comic books, but I was excited to try something. So, try something new. And I should have said no, because it's better left to people who know what they're doing. I feel like I stuck my neck out way too far, and that wasn't right. There are so many other people who were better qualified to do it. All that said, they already had the artist in place, and the general idea of the comic book they wanted me to write. And it was about kind of based on To Catch a Predator. I don't think it was based on it, but it emulates To Catch a Predator, where the story is about this young woman who uh, seeks out child predators. Predators of children. That doesn't make sense. Okay, I try to remember this as best I can. The artwork was really provocative, and the one thing, and that I didn't like that was really upsetting to me, that this person who is trying to avenge predators of children is dressed very provocatively. So I wrote that out, and I guess that is not cool that you tell the artist or the artwork already in place that you're switching it up. And I can understand that there are protocols. So then I tried to change the story to justify it, and again, in my own clumsy way. And that was not satisfactory, so they had someone rewrite it, which is totally their prerogative. I just didn't want my name on it anymore, especially since I couldn't get any answers or direction from the people at Blue Water who I was working with. So he's never contacted me, or I've never been paid for whatever sales there might have been. And I'm embarrassed that my name is on it. Whether or not it's good, my name shouldn't be on it, because that's not the work I did. So I think that's my ultimate beef, and not being dealt with in a upfront, principled manner. It was a very frustrating experience, and I was in over my head, admittedly.
Shortly after that, you got to do a book that was definitely 100% yours, Employee of the Month.
Mm-hmm.
And as somebody who temped for 3 years, I got to say that I identified with a big chunk of the book. And
you know what I'm talking about.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And are there any particular chapters or stories in it that you're proud of?
Yeah, I would go so far as to say I am not entirely ashamed of any of the chapters, which for me is a huge, huge deal. I really like the chapter I write about my sister losing a child. I really like that chapter. People have told me that the chapters they love are the ones where I get caught. I got caught parking in a handicapped parking spot, trying to use my mother's placard, and it just devolved into this thing. And then when I got married in 2007, 2008, my husband and I took scuba diving lessons, and I write this story about not being able to get into the wetsuit. And people have really responded to both of those, which makes me proud that it's relatable, and that I can have that conversation with people.
I read it when it first was published, and then I read it again to prepare for this interview, and it was such a pleasure to read, to kind of see, like, oh, I'm not the only one who thinks that these positions are kind of, well, interchangeable and kind of miserable. And just,
oh, that's really sweet.
It was great to see a kind of a slice of life book that it's something that if you're listening to this podcast when this finally airs, like, go seek it out, go to Amazon, go get it. It's fantastic.
Oh, you are sweet. Thank you.
And so when did you decide to return to Riff Tracks and team up with Bridget?
Bridget called me, and this would have been 2015, I think, and I moved back to the Twin Cities from Austin, Texas, and I was working a day job, and she called me up and she said, I need to talk to you. So I thought I was in trouble. I always think I'm in trouble when somebody says that. And I think we must have met in person. No, maybe it was over the phone. But she just said, "Look, I have an opportunity to do riff tracks with whoever I want, and I want to do it with you. And I'm so nervous to ask you." And I started laughing. I said, "Because we've known each other for years." And I said, "Why would you be afraid?" And she said, "I was afraid that you'd say no." And of course, I love the work. So who's going to say no to that? And I have a really good time. And I think we have a good rapport, and we've gotten a lot of positive feedback. So, so great. So,
Yeah, I gotta say that, I mean, I love Mike, Kevin, and Bill, but every single time there's a Riff Tracks Presents on a Friday, I kind of get even more excited than usual.
That's so cute. I'm delighted, Ryan.
It's the chemistry between the two of you. It seems you're so familiar with each other, and just so kind of, it's like if there's a joke that one of you or a riff that one of you delivers, and then the other is appreciative of it. There's always that kind of knowing laugh that's kind of like, you guys are clearly having fun in the booth doing this. And so how does your past with Bridget kind of inform how you riff? Because sometimes you kind of deviate from commenting on directly what's going on and just kind of like do little asides. And those are my favorite parts.
Oh, wow, that's interesting.
Do you have a favorite movie or short that you've done so far?
We just released She, which I loved. It's actually a really cool looking movie. The art direction is really cool. Some of the shorts, oh shoot, I forget the short where about the kitchen remodeling. I kind of love, because both Bridget and I, of course, respond to these movies, these shorts, telling women how they should be, or what kind of consumers they should be, what kind of wives they should be. We really get each other's senses of humor, and what's interesting, I think, for me, is that we come from very different points of view, but we share an appreciation of each other's point of view.
And so now that it seems to be that there's at least a short or a VOD every month for the past, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 months, is this a pattern that we can expect to continue for the near future?
Oh yeah, I mean we've got things in the pipeline, so I think we're good for another couple of months. We'll see. That's the thing about this business, you just never know. So, but we'll be good for a couple of months at least. Fingers crossed.
And I just gotta heap some love on one particular project that you guys did. Have a Mary Jo Christmas and a Bridget New Year, the first one. I have a very soft spot for. I make my family watch it every Christmas since it came out.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll start working on a Christmas special soon. Again, I hope.
Because I also love the spring special that you guys did this year. That one was particularly good.
Wasn't that a lot of fun? Yeah, I enjoyed that too. Yeah.
But I think it's my favorite part of the Christmas special was the Ford Taurus commercial where you call your husband and sing him the theme over the phone. That has got to be just one of the best.
I'm so delighted.
And you actually re-riffed a movie that you did on MST3K with Bridget. You did Angel's Revenge. What was that like, kind of looking at it with eyes 20 years later?
It was fun. We wanted to try and not repeat any jokes, so it was a challenge, but it was a lot of fun.
Did you go back to the episode itself, or look back at the scripts to kind of make sure that you weren't repeating anything, or was it just kind of...
I think I watched the movie, yes.
Are there any updates on Renfest?
No. Sadly, no. We have it. We're partnering with some people who are trying to shop it around, but I've not heard anything for a while.
I was really looking forward to that one.
I know, fingers crossed. Never say never, I guess, but oof.
And so, what was it like to return to MST3K? And not only as a performer, but also, I think you have writing credits on at least 2 episodes.
Right. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was when I showed up to film, it was very wild to see they had a big budget, unlike MST. So it was there was a lot going on. It was really wild to see the scope of it, a much bigger scope.
During the writing process, how was it different than the original?
Oh, we were writing independently. I wrote a script alone. It wasn't in the writing room.
Okay, so you got the movie and then wrote your own, so kind of similar to Cinematic Titanic then?
Correct.
Okay. And what was it like to show up on set and see Rebecca Hansen as Cynthia, basically your clone?
It was kind of mind-blowing because everyone was like, oh, we can't tell you guys apart. And I felt like, wow, because I'm larger and older, and so good job on the makeup, but it was kind of mind blowing.
You just debuted a new YouTube series 2 days before this recording, the first vlog, if I may say.
Yes, right.
So, what can you tell me about the origins of Ruth Larson?
Well, I've been wanting to do years ago. I think this has been sort of on the back burner or bubbling in my brain for a good 15 years, and just whirled in time enough. And then over the past couple of years, I realized with everything people can do with technology on their own, why wasn't I doing that? And make no mistake, I didn't do a lot of this technology-wise. I had friends helping me out, but I realized I didn't need a big camera or film crew to get this done, and I enlisted my friend Pablo to direct and shoot it and edit it. And so many years ago, it was this big sitcom idea, and then I just sort of reduced it down to what I could handle, and the character name changed, and the scope of it changed. I just wanted to get something done. I'd been thinking about it for so long. I had a lot of great ideas, and I just wanted to bring one of my ideas to fruition. So that, I think, is the thing I'm most thrilled about. I finished something.
And I gotta say, I mean, I know you you downplayed your acting abilities earlier in this interview, but your performance in the first video is absolutely tremendous. It's really good, and I cannot wait to see what you have planned for the next 6 or 7 weeks. I think it is.
Yes.
And so, final question. The only tradition that this podcast will or currently have is it's called Random Recommendations, where I once per episode I ask my friends or casual acquaintances, or in this case, my heroes, to recommend any movie without considering whether or not I would like it, but explain why, so then I can experience the perspective of somebody else, which is always my goal in life.
So, oh wow! Okay, yeah. I think the first thing that comes to mind is Event Horizon. I missed it when it came around, and it just happened to come up on Amazon or Netflix or something. So I thought I'd check it out, and I thought it was pretty scary. I thought it was pretty intense and not badly done. I read an array of reviews on it or perspectives on it, but I was scared. I thought it was pretty intense. Event Horizon.
And it's the Sam Neill and Lawrence Fishburne?
Yes, 1997, I believe. I somehow missed it when it came out, so get back to me. I'll be curious to know what you think.
Will do. First of all, thank you again for being the first guest on this show. It really does mean a lot. And I've said what I'm about to say before to you in text, but for posterity, I just wanted to tell you in person, basically. Uh, I will never be able to emphasize enough the profound impact that the work that you and the rest of the MST3K crew have had on me and countless other people, especially for me. I think it means slightly more living on the spectrum and kind of dealing with life as kind of a scary obstacle at all times.
Mhm.
The show has gotten me through the darkest of my days. Like literally, it has saved my life, and I've detailed that on different occasions, but and it doesn't really bear repeating. But it's just a daily source of comfort and inspiration. And you are one of my heroes, and I will be eternally grateful that you took the time to talk to me about your life and work, and I really appreciate it.
Oh, Ryan, no, thank you for such a thoughtful interview, and thank you for your lovely words. That means so much. So thank you.
I guess this is it. So, ladies and gentlemen, you've just heard MST3K legend Mary Jo Pehl, the first official guest on the Coolness Chronicles, and what a first guest to have.
Yes, a legend. Thank you, Ryan. I'm a legend. Thanks so much, Ryan.
Thank you. So that totally happened. Speaking with Mary Jo was one of the real great thrills of my life, and I truly hope it was the first of many Q&A sessions with my heroes. But this was amazing, and now I can close Chapter 4A of the Coolness Chronicles. But the show's not over yet, folks. Sorry. Every hour of this fine podcast concludes with a segment called Random Recommendations. This week's random recommendation comes from a Facebook user named Shawnee Moore. I actually already had this film in my collection thanks to a great UK version of the Blu-ray produced by Powerhouse, but I hadn't set aside the time to watch it. Boy, am I glad that I did. That film is Dr. Seuss's only live-action effort, 1953's The 5,000 Fingers of Dr. T. About 10 minutes into the film, it becomes very clear why it failed commercially. It's about a little boy named Bart Collins, whose life is being made hell by his evil piano teacher, Dr. Terwilliger, played by Hans Conried. But Bart thinks that all this unpleasantness would go away if his lonely single mother married his father figure, a local plumber. I know that sounds completely uninteresting, but stay with me. Before you can say meta, Bart turns his attention toward the camera and decides to break the fourth wall.
Sometimes I think that Dr. Terwilliger has my mother hypnotized. Holy mackerel, I'll bet you that she... That noise you hear is my friend, Mr. Zabludowski, the plumber. He knows all about the piano, but he's afraid to say so in front of my mother. He thinks Dr. Terwilliger's a real racketeer, a 100% gold-plated phony. Double phony.
2 minutes after that, Bart passes out on the piano and enters a hoary nether dimension that would have David Lynch nodding in approval. If The Wizard of Oz was a dream of wish fulfillment, this is a full-blown stress nightmare. In this nightmare world, Dr. Terwilliger is a tyrannical dictator leading a slave army of 500 children to play his sinister mega piano, Bart included. He has Bart's mom locked away in a cage and hypnotized into loving him, so Bart tracks down the plumber from his real life to help him save the day and sabotage Dr. Terwilliger's opening concert, which ends in an atomic explosion in 1953 in a family film. Every single aspect of this production is genuine Dr. Seuss, from the irony-laced, absurdist dialogue to the gradual unfolding madness of the story to the warped production design where straight lines are hard to find. It's a visual storybook in every sense of the word. But I'm limiting my talking points because there's a Seuss-centric chapter somewhere in the pipeline, and the story behind this film's production and subsequent failure and relatively recent insurgence is a key part of it. But I do want to gush on one particular piece of this puzzle. Hans Conried. He gestures like a demented Reed Richards, contorting every inch of his facial structure and spine into angles that should only be possible in animation. Nobody chews scenery like him, and I mean that in the most loving fashion.
Mrs. Collins, get me the physics laboratory.
Yes, sir. One moment, please. The physics laboratory.
When the plumber Zabludowski has installed the last sink, I want him disintegrated. I want you to disintegrate him slowly. I want him to suffer, atom by atom. At dawn. Mrs. Collins, you had better come with me. You're beginning to build up an immunity to my little hypnotic trances. I think you'd better spend tonight in your lock-me-tight.
Please, Dr. Terwilliger.
There's too much at stake. There'll be no further liaisons tonight with a plumber.
I feel like I ask this question too often, but does that voice sound familiar to you? Maybe this clip from Peter Pan, also released in 1953, will remind you.
Blast that Peter Pan. If I could only find his hideout, I'd trap him in his lair. But where is it? Mermaid Lagoon? No, we've searched that. We've combed Cannibal Cove. Here! No, that's Indian territory. But wait. Those redskins know this island better than I do my own ship. I wonder.
Good morning, Captain.
I've got it! Tiger Lily Smee!
For 5 years, Conrad also starred alongside Paul Frees, whom you may or may not be listening to a special episode about rather soon, as Dudley Do-Right's arch-nemesis on The Rocky and Bullwinkle Show.
That's when a tall, dark mustache appeared, with a man behind it. Yes, Snidely Whiplash, Canada's Black Penny, had turned up again.
You in the contest, mister?
No, but my dog is. Actually, it was a bull elephant, but Whiplash had taught it to scratch its ear, so no one knew the difference.
All right, Spot, pull the sled.
Unlike the others who yelled mush, Whiplash yelled
Sabu!
And the contest was no contest. Snidely had the $10,000, and what's more, he and Spot returned to Skagway every year and continued their winning ways.
Here's the 10,000, Mr. Whiplash.
Hands up, the Spot hasn't pulled yet.
Spot doesn't have to. No one's challenging.
Of course, you can get away with something like that just so long, and then the mounted police are bound to hear about it.
Did you hear about it, Do-Right?
Yes, Inspector, I heard about it.
That's as far as it got, until the following year.
The only thing in this film that even comes close to the amazing performance that Conrad gives is the musical score by Frederick Hollander. After hearing the score, I became very convinced that Danny Elfman must be a fan, because Pee-wee's Big Adventure, my favorite film score of all time, seems like it's quoting directly from this movie at times. downhill from here. Better wrap it up. Please send me your random recommendations on Twitter, Facebook, or email, and make sure to explain why you endorse it. My eternal thanks to the amazing Mary Jo Pehl. You can find her riffs with Bridget at rifftracks.com. For starters, I would recommend Junior Prom and Have a Mary Jo Christmas and a Bridget New Year. Her web series, Ruth Larson Lives, a Lifestyle Vlog, is on YouTube, and you can pick up her book, Employee of the Month, on Amazon or your chosen literature source. Also, special thanks to artist Becky Hopkins for allowing me to use her illustration for this chapter's logo. You can find her work at becky-hopkins.com. Thanks for listening. Please rate and review the show on iTunes or your chosen source, and if you enjoy the program, share it with someone else. This has been the best and largest endeavor I've seen to completion, and it would be nice to keep making the show until it just isn't fun anymore. Links to all subjects discussed on the pod can be found on our website at www.coolnesschronicles.com. There you can email your questions, comments, or random recommendations. And you can also contact me on Twitter at CoolnessPodRyan, or like our Facebook page and watch for updates. Have suggestions for future seasons, as this series is not exclusively about MST3K, it's just a natural first topic, or things to discuss that are MST3K related that I forgot, send them on over. If you want to advertise on this program, I'm a total sucker for a sponsor, so I'll pimp out any product you have. The show will be taking next week off, but after that, it's back to business as usual. Until then, do what you love, don't be a dick, and, as always...
I'm superstitious. Just before I start a new movie, I always kill a hobo with a hammer.
I mean, goodbye, for now. The Coolness Chronicles is written, produced, and edited by Ryan Rodriguez. Executive producers are Tracy Rodriguez and Luis Rodriguez. Original music by Bildschirm. Please visit bildschirm.bandcamp.com for more information.